Welcome to In This Corner with Cyrus Fees. I am Cyrus Fees, and this episode, super excited. And this is, well, first off, one of the most interesting documentaries. And when you talk about mixed martial arts films and documentaries, this one has to take the cake. It's kind of a legendary watch. I had a chance to watch it myself finally after years, and man, it blew my mind. So I'm so excited to have this man on the show. And let's just go through a few accolades here. 13-year veteran of mixed martial arts, D1 collegiate wrestling national champion with Syracuse, multiple-time ADCC champion and super fight champion, World Valley Tudo's championship tournament winner, UFC 14 and 15 heavyweight tournament winner, and of course the subject of the critically acclaimed HBO documentary, The Smashing Machine. I am talking to the one and only Smashing Machine, Mark Kerr. Mark, how are you doing out there?
I'm good, Cyrus. I appreciate you having me on the show. And, you guys, you were talking a little bit about pre-show. It's like I should do this more often. I actually enjoy talking to other people about the industry and some of the things going on, some of the fighters going on. So I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, 100%, man. I have just been digging in, to the history of MMA before I even got into it. And, yeah, man, I've made so many good connections over the years. So I love rehashing those and talking about these stories because these are the type of stories that people just love to hear about anyways. And you guys are some of the most interesting fighters that we've ever seen in the sport. You guys were trailblazers. So it's very important, I think, to keep that history alive and keep you guys out there. But first and foremost, this show was born out of the coronavirus epidemic, the pandemic, because we needed entertainment out there. And I just want to know, man, you're in Arizona, it's a hot spot and has been a hot spot for a while. How are things going out there right now?
It's been a little bit tough, especially, I have a 15-year-old son, and it has been, it's been really difficult to keep him entertained over the stretch of time. And then, in Arizona during the summer, you add the additional factor in of heat, which it's been ridiculously hot out here. Pools are closed. Obviously your neighbor's pool's a little different, but still, I have a couple of risk factors associated with the virus. Like I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, a couple of years ago. And so it's one where trying to tell my son, hey, listen, here's a group of people you're allowed around. You're not allowed to expand that circle one way or the other. Here's why. And getting him to understand it and not look at it like, yeah, okay, Dad, okay, Dad. But it's been a trial, and it's still, I think we still have a little bit to go. It just really has been interesting. So
yeah, 100%. I could totally relate with you. My son just happens to have kind of a mild form of asthma, and he's 5 years old, and it's one of those things that why take the chance if you don't have to? So we're playing it safe as possible, because you don't want to have that kid that has the underlying and, who knows what could happen.
Yeah, and you know what? It's the unfortunate thing is it's not that I'm afraid of, like talking to somebody. It's like, hey, I have two friends. One's 82, the other one's 79. It's like, you run. So it's presented it's presented a new moral dynamic. I think interjected into it too. So it's interesting. I'm glad the show was born, and I'm glad I'm talking to you, put it that way.
Hey, it all worked out. And obviously we're thinking of the people that are seriously affected by this thing. One thing that has happened, and it really is affecting folks, is that, collegiate sports, high school sports are all getting pushed back. And you really feel for these athletes. And obviously yourself coming up through high school, and they're in Toledo and then some in Iowa.
Yep.
Obviously, how important that is to these kids. This is life, right? I'm sure it was life for you. You can imagine what they're dealing with right now. What are your thoughts on that? Is it just one of those things that's just really unfortunate, or do you think maybe it should be handled different?
I think they can not, there's been enough protocols. I think people are coming up with enough intelligent ways to go about presenting this and allowing the kids to still participate in it. Like with my son right now, he's in phase 2 of the football season. So phase 1 is they have these small little groups, and the groups can't change. They have the same coach. The kids in the group, if one drops out, he's out. There isn't adding another kid to the group. And then they go to phase 2, which is they expand the group. And so the group gets a little bit bigger. And then phase 3 and all this other stuff. So obviously some smarter people than me and smarter than people than, some of the people who sat down and said, okay, how do we do this? How do we make it where we can still protect the kids, still protect the staff, still have a balance between the two? And I think there's a balance, like what the Big Ten did in canceling all football. I think it's just a broad overreaction. And not that I'm from Ohio and Ohio State, but Ohio State has like a perennial epic, team that they put together. And for those kids not to be able to get on the field, I think it's tragic. I honestly think it's tragic. I know how much sports meant to me, and for all the different reasons that they mean something, the participation, the discipline, the dedication, all the different time, the effort. I mean, most kids that make it to that level, they've been fantasizing and training for this since they've been a kid, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And so to take that away from them, I think it's an overreaction. I really do.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but it's funny because I like the balance that you're at, because you do want to think of the safety of people, but there are ways to go about it. I think some of the leagues, I think the UFC has done a good job, and the NBA, what they're doing right now, and some of these other sports leagues, they figured it out. You just got to really get in there and brainstorm and figure things out, because there really is a lot of not only just money, but these kids' futures on the line. So. I totally get where you're coming from, and hopefully they'll get these things kind of shaped out as we go on. Taking you all the way back to Toledo, man. The thing about Toledo, Ohio, the only thing I remember about Toledo as a kid is the Mud Hens, just because in Iowa, and we always played the Toledo Mud Hens. I definitely remembered that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What was growing up in Toledo like?
It's a medium-sized town. I'm going to blank on this now, but I think it's like 250,000, 300,000 people. I grew up on what's called the east side. So the Maumee River, which goes through Toledo, it divides the city. So you have the north, the west, and the south side, and then you have the east side. We were almost considered like another planet, just because we were divided by the river. Oh, you're an east sider. So it almost felt like this outsider, kind of attitude. And it felt like growing up, like you're always fighting against the system, or you're always going to prove somebody wrong. So I think in some ways it motivated me to have that kind of outcast feeling of like, oh, I'll show you. And so I think it was motivating. I would raise my kid in Toledo. It's a great place to grow up. It has just a different feel and a different beat to it. Especially, I've been in Phoenix now 25 years. Yeah. And so it's just a great place. A lot of my family is still back there. When I came to Arizona and I didn't have to deal with winters, I was never going back home. Yeah. So it's a really great place.
No doubt. And then, so tell me about how, and I looked at your Wikipedia and did some research and such, but so you get over to Bettendorf, which is kind of chance because you end up running into Miletich.
Isn't that crazy?
Bettendorf's favorite son, Pat Miletich. So talk about how that all.
Isn't that crazy? So my brother, who's quite a bit older than me, he's 15 years older than me. I was in 8th grade getting ready to be a freshman in high school, and I was just unruly that summer. And my mom said, okay. So she sent me and my other brother, Matthew, we're only 15 months apart. So he was going to be a junior in high school. I was going to be a freshman. And she said, you're going to live with your brother. And so she shipped us out to Iowa. My brother was finishing his last year at chiropractic school at Palmer, which is in Davenport. Yeah. And we took a look around, and it was just kind of one of those things where it's like, well, this school seems to be one of the better ones. And we ended up going to Bettendorf, and it was really weird because I wasn't even going to go out for the wrestling team. And my brother Michael, who's my oldest brother, he can testify to this. So it was a friend of his who wrestled had said, "You're going out for the wrestling team," and we're at my brother's house, and I'm like, "No, I'm not." And I just finished with football, and he said, "Okay, if I can hold you and your brother Matthew down on the ground, you are going to go out for the wrestling team tomorrow." And literally, his name's Garrett Brackish. And I was like, "Okay, dude, like whatever." Me and my brother Matt were like, "Okay, game on." Well, in like 15 minutes, man, both of us fucking swimming off of our back. And I honored what I said I would do. I went out for the wrestling team, and I had no idea that it was like, I think the year before they had won states, and the year before that they had like taken second, and the year before that they had won it again and all this stuff. So I think Pat was either a junior or senior, and I was a freshman. And believe it or not, this is what's really cool. So I was a freshman, an outsider. I came from, nobody knew anything about me other than me just showing up there. And Pat was actually really cool with me. I distinctly remember, even though, he's not that tall a guy. Back then, he was like the biggest statue you can imagine, because he was like a high school heartthrob. And so anyways, it just turns out where Pat was always cool with me, and we wrestled back then, and I didn't really know what I was doing in the wrestling room, and thank God it turned out that way.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, Pat's a great guy. We've actually interviewed him here on the show, and awesome guy. Man, he is conspiracy central, but it is always interesting to talk to him about it.
Oh yeah.
I feel like he's way smarter than me, and if I believed half the stuff he did, I think I'd be afraid to go outside. But it is what it is, though. He's a great dude, though, for sure.
Yeah, you get into like the flat earthers, that type of conspiracy. It's like, I can't even go there. It's like otherworld logic. It's like, oh, okay, So I get it.
Ignorance is bliss. Let's just put it that way. I'll
leave it absolutely, man.
But, so you end up. So you did your little stint there in Bettendorf, and that's interesting because the wrestling bug bit you, which is crazy. Because I wrestled for a year when I was a senior, and I grew up in Northwest Iowa, and just that 1 year, man, I was like, yo, this is too much. I mean, I did it for my dad, who was a coach, and then I was done.
Yeah.
But it is life. It really is. Wrestling is a religion. It's life. It's how you live your life. It's really intense stuff, and it really shapes a person, which is pretty cool. So you go back to Toledo and you start doing the wrestling in Toledo. You end up going to Syracuse, man, which is really incredible.
Which is crazy, right?
How'd you get to Syracuse? I mean, out of all the schools, obviously a lot of things.
It's a straight. So I went down to Ohio State for one of my recruiting trips. I had an opportunity to watch Ohio State in the Horseshoe play football. I got to meet, a lot of people on the team. I get to meet Archie Griffin, two-time Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, a lot of really cool stuff. I thought that Ohio State was going to be it. It was going to be Ohio State. I couldn't see myself really going to a Michigan school. We were kind of, it was just kind of drummed in us, Ohio State was the place to go. And I just wasn't, it sounds strange to say, but I wasn't that strong academically. And so Ohio State took a look at it, and they actually recruited a kid that repeated as a state championship, a guy named Ferd Miller. And this kid was a two-time state champ. I won states as a junior, didn't win it as a senior. And then in combination with the grades, they just kind of went, okay, we're going to pass on you. They recruited Ferd Miller. It's really weird that at my junior year in high school, the assistant wrestling coach for Syracuse spoke at my high school for like a leadership conference or something. And I ended up meeting him. His name is Gene Mills. And he said, hey, I see that you won state championship here. Why don't you come out to my summer camp? And I came out to a summer camp in between my junior and senior year. He watched me wrestle. He was like, holy crap, I think this guy could be a really good wrestler. And he continued to recruit me. He thought I was going to get a scholarship to an Ohio State, Michigan, or one of the Big Ten schools. And when I didn't, he brought me in for a late recruiting trip. And he offered me what at the time was just a fantastic deal. Syracuse most colleges have what's called an academic exemption. And so when you don't meet the standards of what they would consider for their admission standards, athletically, they have a different set of standards. They'll go, okay, you're NCAA eligible. You're not a straight A student. You're not a, honor student. But, academically, you're done okay. Da, da, da. So I got in on an athletic exemption academically. And that was kind of like, once the door was open, it turned out to be really good. I owe great debt of gratitude to Gene Mills, because he stuck with me for, some rough times at Syracuse. There's a lot of growing up that I had to do.
So, yeah, Syracuse, great school, amazing school, actually, for media as well. I was looking at it myself. And that being said, you end up picking up a national championship, which, incredible at 190 pounds. And funny enough, runner-up to that was Randy Couture.
I know, isn't that crazy?
All these things tie in, man. It's like it's a small world when it comes to wrestling and MMA and some of these things. And talk about that whole process and picking up that championship. I'm guessing final matchup would have been with Randy.
It was. So, oh God, man, this is so what's kind of unsaid about it, and it's not in any. Nobody's really written about it because I really haven't talked about it. I wrestled Randy.
It's an exclusive.
When I know, right? This is an exclusive, right? So I ended up wrestling Randy. It came into mind when everything shook out at the NCAA tournament. I realized that Randy was going to make it through on the other side of the bracket. That it was like, holy crap, man, this is going to be a grind. Because the one thing I remember about him when I wrestled him before was when you have a Greco background, like a Greco-Roman background, you're a grinder. You just are mauled. Look at Dan Henderson, the way Dan Henderson fights. He's just relentless, man. He's a mauler. And then when you watch Randy was really good at dirty boxing and that in tight, close. He could do a lot of stuff. So when looking at it wrestling-wise, he's Greco background. He's going to be a pusher and a grinder. And that's what I remember before. And so part of my whole strategy, when you get somebody that pushes that hard, is you do a lot of level changes. And he just was falling over the top of me. So I ended up, shooting one shot, putting him to his back, and then it ended up being a 12-4 victory, which was, looking back on it, it probably could have been a lot closer than that. I think Randy was so amped up to try to win an NCAA championship because the year before he had taken second. And so, again, he had taken second. So, I mean, he's redeemed himself 1,000 times over. I mean, he holds so many accolades, which is incredible because what I was going to say is he's 4 years older.
Yeah.
So in college, say I was 24, would have been 23. He was like 26 or 27.
It's amazing.
So
it's crazy.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah, Randy's that guy, man. It's that kind of has epitomized his whole career as he's always been just a little bit older than everybody else, and it just makes those victories and those accomplishments that much sweeter.
Oh, incredible. What he was able to do in his 40s it's incredible. I mean, you might be able to do basketball when you're, be a Vince Carter and play into your 44, 45, 46, but you're not doing no MMA when you're 45, 46 at any kind of level that means anything.
Yeah, you're right. Every time we see anything close to that, it doesn't usually look too good. So, you end up moving to MMA, and we'll talk about that with obviously Mark Coleman, the big cat, Tom Erickson. Love that. He's awesome. But, I read back I was looking at your bio a little bit about how you really loved WWF and you loved wrestling back in the day. Was that even a consideration back then? Because, wrestling was pretty big at that time. Did you think,
it was huge.
I tried to figure something out here and try that route?
Part of what I did do, I just started fighting, and there was 2 WWE shows that came here to town. The one show I had an opportunity to actually meet with Shane McMahon.
Okay.
And physically, he could see that I had the physicalness of what they were looking for. And he just sat me down. There was another guy named RJ that was one of the announcers forever, like the old dude that wore the cowboy hat,
So, JR.
JR.
Yeah,
Yes. So I had an opportunity to talk to him too. So basically, they both said to me, this is like a man's world, the WWE, because if you're not 100% committed to this, and you have anything that, how did they describe it? Basically, if you don't have your together, this will just eat you alive. You know, you're on the road 300 days out of the year. You're traveling. It's a huge ton workload. And if you're not able to handle it, and you don't think you're able to handle it, don't even try.
Sure.
Because the industry, you know, it produces a lot of bad habits. You know, instead of stretching, getting healthy, going to physical therapy or doing whatever, I'm just going to pop some Vicodin and get in the ring because I got to perform tomorrow. And then the day after I have to do Friday night this or Monday night SmackDown or this, that. And he goes, it'll eat you alive.
Yeah.
You know? So they made that abundantly clear. They said they would clear a path for me to go to their school in Atlanta, Georgia, to be able to do that. And I talked with a guy named Rick Bassman, and Rick basically said the same thing. Rick was like, dude, here it is in a nutshell. And I just go, I'm going to, you know, for me anyways, I go, okay, I'm going to be fighting for a little bit longer. And then I think if I'm able to do it, I would, but it never came up again. I actually signed a pro wrestling contract in Japan. Okay. Years and years later. Yeah. And I did some events there, which was kind of interesting because they do it. Their pro wrestling is completely different. And I'll go over that in a little bit. Yeah, no, I love that. A lot of guys have, obviously, you know, Don Fry being one of those guys, and I think Boba just did it. A ton of guys have did that, and I love that. I love that Japan really embraces the fighters like they do, and we will get into that because I think it's amazing how the Japanese embrace the fighters and how they do things. I think it's incredible. And I know you have a lot of experience with the Japanese. That being said, you go into MMA. I want to talk, before we get into UFC, I want to talk about WVC. So you end up down in Sao Paulo, Brazil, fighting on the same card. You obviously, you win this tournament, and that kind of puts your name out there, you know. But Pedro Rizzo is also on this card. And was it your first time in Brazil going down there for that? Yeah, it was. And this was kind of one of those really interesting things where the guy that was helping me out was a local guy here named Richard Hamilton, and he had a karate dojo in the same place where we were training for the 96 Olympics. It's how we kind of met. You know, he originally signed Coleman, he signed me, he signed Tom Erickson. He helped Dan Severn out. So he literally like kind of wandered into, you know, Badass's den, you know, basically. And, and so, he was the original guy, and I didn't know what I was saying yes to, because he's like, hey, we're going to do this Valley Tudo. It's going to be this thing down here today, and they're going to give you, all I heard was they're going to pay you $25,000. Yeah. And I think that year leading up to the 96 Olympics, I was still on Syracuse's payroll. So that was I think $950 a month. Yeah. And then that was only for 8 months out of the year. And then I was getting a stipend from Foxcatcher that was like $1,200 a month. So I think that whole year I made like $21,000. Yeah. And somebody's offered me $25,000 to fight in one night, and it's going to be in cash. Yeah. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. You know, it's that simple. Yeah, okay. And when I signed up for it, you know, we started training for it. I was like, I don't even know really what I'm training for. We're watching VHS tapes. I don't know if you're like of course. Somebody that's listened to us, they'll go, yeah, I think my mom has some of those in the closet somewhere. Of course. So I'm getting VHS tapes. I'm watching it, doing all this stuff, trying to figure out what. And it just really, until I got down there, it really wasn't apparent that this was like the basement of a hotel. Yeah. It was, and I'm not kidding you, it was probably 700, 750, 900 Brazilian men. And it was just a bunch of Brazilian men and a couple Brazilian. I mean, for every one Brazilian woman, there was at least 50 Brazilian men there. It was just crazy. And it was a ring. There was no locker room. There's no nothing. There was like a tiny, probably 4 foot by 8 foot partition. That was my locker room.
Yeah.
It was great. Like looking back on it going, oh, I said yes to that.
Yeah.
And it was no rules, no gloves. The only thing you weren't allowed to do is bite, and gouge somebody in the eye. You're allowed to headbutt, knee, elbow, kick, punt, so
Yeah.
Looking back on it, no, if you would have told me all this stuff, I would have probably been like, nah, I'll find a different way to make money.
Yeah, it was next level. I've watched some videos and some of the old stuff with Vanderlei Silva, and just wow, man, it is next level. It really is. It really is no rules. I mean, it's wild stuff. And there's a couple of things I took from what you were just talking about. First of all, to be in Brazil in an arena and it's just all the men, that's not too good, because there's a lot of beautiful women in Brazil. I would imagine you'd want to spend time with the not all the men.
Right? Right?
Because
there are a lot of good-looking women in Brazil. Yes, there are.
It just goes without saying. I've been down there quite a few times myself. But I was married the whole time, but I could only look. But, wow, amazing stuff. But that being said, I also heard another key word, something that dinged in my head that I didn't realize. So you were getting a stipend from Foxcatcher. Yeah. So I didn't know that. I didn't know that you were working with Foxcatcher. I had no idea you were tied in with all that. Gosh, give me something. Give me something from the Foxcatcher experience.
Oh man, oh God, man, it's a lot to unwrap. It really is, because there's a lot there. I was kind of late to the show, so I ended up signing with Foxcatcher in 1993. Okay. That's after I made my first world team, and so John DuPont, obviously he's at the world team trials. He sees me wrestle. I talked to another guy named Rob Calabrese who actually lived on the farm, and Rob Calabrese is like, hey, you need to go see John. So I actually drove from Syracuse down to Philadelphia, showed up at the farm, and met with John and stuff. And he just was very, it's really interesting. When the movie came out, I had talked to the director. He interviewed a lot of people prior to the movie, and one of the questions he asked me, he said, "What is one of the first things you notice when you meet with John DuPont?" And I said, the first time I met with him, one of the things I noticed is, for somebody that has that much money, his all teeth are rotted out of his mouth. It's the weirdest thing in the world.
That is weird. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a 50,000 square foot house. You have 1,000 acres of land, which are worth, tens of millions of dollars, and your teeth are all rotted out. I couldn't figure it out. And there's so many other little giddy ups that were weird about him. Yeah. I've stood down in the basement of the big house. We call it the big house, which was his, mansion that he lived in. And I've looked at certain places in the basement of the big house because he promised me that there were these secret passages and all this. So, looking back on it, it's actually tragic, because it was probably a harbinger of things to come. Yeah. Realizing that he was schizophrenic. He had untreated alcoholism. He had untreated drug addiction. And all of that manifests itself into this psychopathic delusion of him thinking people were after him, and him holding, he actually left his whole estate to a wrestler named Valentino Giordanoff, who's a Bulgarian wrestler. Yeah. He, in the family, tried to contest it and all this, and he actually wrote a will when he was clear, thought of mind and everything. I think that he actually cared for or loved, was infatuated with Valentino, and left his estate. And I think it's just a theory that part of what happened to Dave Schultz was because of Dave's relationship with Valentino, and that precipitated John finally having a psychotic break. And it's just tragic. It's just tragic. Dave was my coach. Dave was my coach for 3 years. Wow. For 3 years, 93, 94, 95, and then he was murdered in January of 1996. So leading all the way up there, I spent a lot of time down at the farm. A lot of time.
I can only imagine. But, outside of having to have these run-ins with DuPont, the atmosphere must have been cool because, I mean, you know, you're surrounded by your brothers with wrestling, and it must have been really cool outside of when he pops in, and I'm sure everything just got tense and weird, right? I mean, is that basically what it was?
Yep. Oh, 100%. It was honestly, when it was just the guys hanging out, like we would go to Rob Calabrese or we'd go down and we'd have a barbecue at Dave and Nancy's house, or we'd go over to, you know, one of the other wrestlers, you know, and stuff. Oh my God, it's like, you're kidding me. It's fantasy land. You have state of the art. You have an indoor Olympic swimming pool. Indoor Olympic swimming pool, right? You have a state of the art wrestling facility with you have 3 full mats, right? You have a training area, you have a kitchen area, you have a training facility. You had back then, which was state of the art, you had laser disc study, so you can study. He had accumulated a lot of footage of all these wrestlers from around the world, and you can pull them up on laser disc, and you can study how this person did the single leg or double leg and this, that, and the other. So he was way ahead of it as far as the facility, the opportunity, what it was awesome. Yeah. It was awesome, man. You don't have Dave Schultz and all these guys accumulating in that area and everyone training if it wasn't a freaking amazing training facility. Yeah. And then you add John in and it just throws it off center.
to say the least. And we could talk about that all day, but you know what? I want to talk about Pride. Well, let's talk UFC as well. I mean, obviously UFC, you had this, it's like you were there. It was like almost like a cup of coffee, but you kicked ass. I mean, in the time you were there, boom, you're kicking everybody's ass, and then you're gone, which is crazy. You know, I mean, you ran through 2 tournaments, and a couple things that stood out to me. You know, that first one, you know, you had Coleman on top of the card, and he loses his title. Yeah, in the same one where you win the tournament, that had to be super bittersweet. You know, to win the tournament, but your guy losing his belt.
Yeah, you know, leading up to that, man, him and I knew that that if he didn't get it over quickly, that it was just going to be a long night. You know, we had a condensed training camp. He was kind of dinged up a little bit, so we didn't spend that much time in the wrestling room. You know, so Mark and I spent more time in the weight room and doing cardio that way, and that doesn't prepare you like you need to be prepared for an MMA fight. And so that was bittersweet. Mark, as always, you know, backstage, he was ecstatic for me. He was just happy that I, you know, like, so it was like, you know, getting your cherry broke, you know, when you're fighting for the UFC. You know, it was such a big deal to do it domestically here.
Oh, for sure.
You know, and it's just one where it's like that training camp was me, Coleman, and Kevin Randleman. It was us 3 training together.
That guy.
So, I mean,
and that guy too. Monster. I mean, we could talk a half hour on that, or an hour on that. That guy, I've had a chance to spend time with Randleman. A really solid weekend in Vegas where we were kind of all working together, and that was just one of the most dynamic, wild, interesting characters I've ever been around in my life, man. Such a cool guy. Yeah. And I hate that he's gone. It's very, very sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, sometimes in certain topics when I talk to Cole about it, man, he's not over. He's still got a broken heart over it. He does. You know, he really does. So.
Another guy, Dan Bobish, you know, we go to the next tournament. You end up beating Bobish. That guy, you know, interesting guy, Dan Bobish, because you don't hear a whole lot about him, but he was one of those guys that was steady back in the day, huge guy. Give me some thoughts on Dan Bobish.
Just, oh God, man. Like one of those things I look at and like not even realizing, like, how am I going to move him? I mean, how am I going to move him off center? I mean, when you got that lowest center of gravity and you're that stocky built, like the 2 things I always had trouble with wrestling-wise was a guy built like Bobish or really, really tall, lanky guy. Yeah. Are the 2 things, because tall, lanky, I can't get leverage on certain things. Short, squatty, I just can't move him. And that was my first thought when I saw Bobish. Was like, oh, man, this is going to be – and it turns out where it's like once I got in and got a hold of him, it was almost like equal strength, but it was like, you know, I have better wrestling skills. I could knock him off center and get him off axis. And and tip him over. And like any big dude that's built like that, once he gets in certain positions, it's just going to be really hard to fight off of him. You know, he's a top guy. He's not going to be a guy that wants to try to lock in any kind of a guard or anything like that. I couldn't even imagine seeing Bovis try to pull someone in a guard.
Yeah, man, he's an absolute beast. Kind of reminds me of Tim Sylvia. It's just an interesting fighter, you know. And you go to Pride, and the funny thing about Pride, or the interesting thing to me about Pride, is that this was a big move because you come into the UFC and make such an impact, winning 2 tournaments, then you jump to Pride. Nowadays with social media, you know what's going on because you see everything. Every negotiation, every conversation, people are talking about it on Twitter. But back in the day, you never heard about these things. What was going on behind the scenes? Was it purely money? Was there something else going on between you and UFC? Was there a disagreement or something where you guys didn't connect? Talk about that jump.
There was a disagreement with the UFC. The original contract I signed with them was for a 3-tournament fight deal, and after I did number 15, they were going to do an event in Japan that was going to be a single fight. It wasn't going to be a tournament, and I told them, I said, my contract is invalid for a single bout because it specifically says in there that you sign me for 3 tournaments.
Yeah,
and
I
wanted to renegotiate on it because it was like, okay, I'm going to do a single bout. The competition is going to be a little bit higher. You know, because sometimes when you fill all the holes in a bracket, you're going to fill some of the holes with fluff. You know, you're going to put good guy here, and you wanted to meet at the end.
Of course. Yeah.
So I wanted to renegotiate it. At that point, the UFC didn't have any leverage because it was only legal in 4 states. It was like Alabama, Mississippi, and a couple other states that would allow their boxing commission to sanction it. And at that time, I got approached by an attorney that had been contacted by Pride. It was called KRS back then. It wasn't called Dream Stage Entertainment, right? It was called KRS. And so they contacted me through an attorney in New Jersey, and that attorney said, hey, would you at least entertain the idea of fighting in Japan? And here's kind of preliminary what I've been authorized to offer you. And he said, we would like for you to fight Royce Gracie. That was one. And then the second part was, we're willing to pay you $155,000 to fight Royce. And the UFC was paying me $25,000 for a tournament. So for 2 fights, I was getting $25,000 for 1 fight, and against Royce Gracie, I get paid $155,000, and it's all in cash.
Yeah. Wow.
So I was like, okay. I said, what do I need to, like, literally, I go, you don't even need to take it any further. I said, where, like, literally, where are we going from here, right?
Yeah, of course.
And they made arrangements for me to fly from Phoenix to San Francisco. In San Francisco, I picked up an interpreter that got on the same flight with us. That was like assigned to me. He was like, I'm your guy, whatever you need. You know, I'm your guy.
Yeah.
And so we flew over to Japan, and I got an opportunity to meet with everybody. And actually, Royce Gracie and I did a news conference, and there's a fight poster. They're super rare, rare. I think it's Pride 2, and it's him and I faced off against each other.
Yeah.
And it says Royce Gracie, Mark Kerr, has the date for the fight, the cost for the tickets, everything.
Yeah.
And the tragic thing is, when I got back to the States, the UFC had heard about the news conference and all that, and they actually sued me in federal court. They sued me in New York City, which at the time, that's where the jurisdiction was for my contract. And they sued me in federal court. And so they put an injunction on it. They tried to take my passport. Yeah. It turned into a cluster because it literally was like they had no rights for a single bout. They only had rights for multiple fights in one night, a tournament fight. And they just kept saying, nope, 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 nope. You know, it's for all fights. And even though it's specified tournaments in the contract, and they fought it. I mean, I know it ended up costing, I know it ended up costing a lot, because I ended up getting an attorney in New York City that I actually went to Syracuse with, a guy named Frank Ryan. His brother, Tom Ryan, is the head coach at Ohio State.
Okay.
And so I went to school with both of them, Tommy Ryan and Frank Ryan became an attorney. I hired him, and it turns into basically where, here's the screwy part is, so I'd only fought in the Valley Tudo, Pride 14, Pride 15. They sue me. You know, Pride doesn't want to take on that liability, because if they have me fight and then the UFC wins for breach of contract, they can turn around and sue Pride for unspecified damages. So basically, I was almost going to be locked out of the industry, because if the UFC won, they could choose to not exercise the right for that last fight and just have me sit on the sidelines forever and a day. Or Pride could have just said, sorry, it's too complicated, thank you, but no thank you. Yeah. And so it ended up being, at the end of the day, where a lot of money was spent that didn't have to be spent. They basically said, okay, we're done fighting this. Buy out your last option. So they spent $400,000 on attorneys for me to pay them $25,000.
Oh, jeez. Wow, man. Wow.
Yeah. So isn't that crazy?
It is. It's twisted, man. You got caught up in the bureaucracy of it all.
Yeah, that's what it was. And
a lot of fighters have over the years. And, you know, when you're a company like UFC, when you keep that legal counsel at all times, they're going to do what they got to do. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But, you know, you do end up in Pride. You didn't. I'm sure you made some decent paydays. To say
yeah.
But
I made up for it.
Yeah. Well, the only other thing I'll say about UFC is, do you have any other regrets? Obviously, I didn't know quite about that falling out and that lawsuit part of it. Do you have any regrets that, like, maybe you didn't hold the heavyweight title, or that you didn't do more domestically? I mean, when you look back at it now.
Yeah, that's the one regret. So winding the clock back, so when all that was going on, the UFC was still owned by Bob Meyerowitz. Yeah. Bob Meyerowitz is the one that sold it to the Fertitta brothers, and they sold it, so on. So when Bob sold it, he sold it. And so when Frank and Lorenzo ended up buying it, I had an opportunity to go up to, Tito Ortiz's training camp for the first fight they were going to have as new owners of the UFC. And so I went up and I met Frank and Lorenzo, and an opportunity to drive with them from Big Bear in California all the way back out to Beverly Hills, which is like a 3.5, 4-hour drive. And I had an opportunity to get to talk to them, get to know them. They invited me out to New Jersey for the first fights and stuff, so on and so forth. So they actually offered me a fight, and that was I was still under contract with the Japanese.
Yeah.
And they approached me one time and offered me a fight. And when I said, I can't do it at this time, I can do it in the future when I'm not under contract. And the Japanese would have let me fight. If I had protested enough, they would have let me fight domestically here. And that was it. That was the one offer they made. And what was the
fight?
Pete Williams, actually.
Really?
The fight, Pete Williams, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where it was like, it was a one offer, and I was talking to their booking guy, Joe. I always blank on his last name, but he did their matchmaking for years and years and years.
Joe Silva, yeah.
Yeah, Silva. Okay, yeah. So Joe called me, says, "Here, we got this worked out," and again, it was for $25,000.
Yeah, jeez. I mean, once you get a taste of six figures, it's kind of hard to take it back. It's still, there's a lot of controversy today that these guys just don't get paid what they should, and I'm kind of in that camp as well, especially for the guys that are coming up, and even the mid-range guys. I think they ought to be making a little bit more than what they do. There's always going to be that argument for unions and so far, and all that. But I would like to see the guys get paid a little bit more. And I definitely
100%.
Because it's a tough life.
God.
It's a very, very tough life.
It's brutal. It's brutal. So if you're a fighter, this is the way I thought back then. I thought like I have X amount of fights, right? So I'm thinking I have X amount of fights. So every time I step in the ring, I got to maximize what I can do financially because I have to take one fight off the board, right? Say I got 25 fights and I'm 15 fights into it and I think that I have 10 fights left. That's what my body can do. That's it. That's the number that I put down, just knowing that how hard training camps are. The fights are easy. The training camps are what just beats the crap out of your body, right? So every time I'm in that ring, man, I gotta say, how much is it worth? I mean, where I'm gonna take it off the board, I better try to put as much financial security behind me as I possibly can. So yeah, I never questioned why I made the decisions I made, even though a friend of mine said, hey, usually you try to make a decision as if you had $1 million in the bank. What is the best possible decision for you? And in some situations, you can do that. You can go, okay, is it the best for me to do X or Y or Z or D? But other ones you can't. And with fighting, just in the ring, you have to go, how much are you going to pay me? And it needs to be enough to make sense. I believe there should be a commission. There should be a league. It should be divested from Dana White being the only arbiter of somebody's MMA career. He can say, hey, your career goes on, or nope, you're done, retire. Because I'm not going to pay you anymore. I'm not going to have you fight anymore. And it makes it really tough because I think along your lines, it's like, I looked at it like this: when the dollar amount was announced, what they sold the company for, the reason why they sold it for $4 billion is because they never paid any of their fighters.
You can make a good argument with that. You can certainly make a very good argument with that. You're right. And there's been a number of things throughout. And I try not to be so incredibly critical, but because I think that there's things about the UFC that are great. And I think that if you as a fighter are good at marketing and you're good at doing some of the things you can do, I think you can do well with it. But not everybody can talk like Conor McGregor, and not everybody has these connections. You know what I mean? It's and for those guys, you do okay, but by the time you pay this guy and pay this guy and pay this and pay that, doesn't leave a whole lot of meat on the bone anymore. So it's crazy.
The part about it is the UFC tried to get every single aspect of they own, tap out. They took it away a fighter's right to have anything on him, so he can no longer make money off advertising on his clothing or this, that, and the other. They scooped every single dollar off of a fighter's plate as they possibly could, because that's on the side of, look how much money we're making. And again, it's a business. I get it. It's America. It's capitalism. But when you're doing off the backs of fighters, that's where I have issues with going, okay, you're going to leave these guys beat up and broke at the end of their career. Okay, I'm not okay. I'm not okay with that.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm not.
There's a lot of voices out there, a guy like Nate Corey, who I'm really good friends with. There's a lot of guys out there that are really pushing hard to make some of those things that we're talking about a reality. And I really do hope that it gets there. I really, really do, for the fighter's sake. While you're in Pride, I have not been over to Japan. I've only passed through the airport. I've never announced in Japan, and I've never commentated in Japan. It's one of those things that's high on my list. Being a part of Pride at that time when it was literally the biggest and best and just legendary. Everybody to this day would give anything to have that sort of energy back. It was
it's incredible.
And so many guys that never even went to the UFC that are just legendary, like your Fedors and a guy, of course, with Igor. Some of these guys that never even stepped into UFC, but they're legendary and they never had to step into UFC. Give me, because we could talk all day about Pride. We really could. Things I want to hit on. Give me a story just from being in Japan at the height of your career when people are screaming for you guys.
Oh, God.
Just give me a good story that represents how crazy your life was in Japan at the height of it all?
So, so one of my training partners was Rico Rodriguez, and before Rico ended up signing a contract with the Japanese, I brought him over with me to one of my fights, and he cornered for me. And it was his first time over to Japan, and he's a jiu-jitsu guy, so for him, Japan took on a couple different roles. For him, it gives him an idea. Like, I brought him to a couple different dojos that he could experience that would be like, just a really cool experience for him. And so I said, Rico, this gives you an idea of the popularity of the sport here. I said, watch this. So we were in, I'm going to say it's close to Roppongi, which is their like entertainment district. I said, I'm going to stand on the street corner here for 20 minutes. And in 20 minutes, I'll have 50 people that'll be around me. And Rico's kind of looking at me like, you're like, okay, like, yeah, you're in the middle of the city. There's 30 million people, right? And you're going to stand on the street corner, and there's going to be people that are going to recognize you, and they're going to ask for autographs and pictures. I go, yeah, maybe about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I goes, okay. So I just literally standing on the street corner, and sure enough, man, within 30 minutes, there's like a sea of people around me, and they're asking for pictures, and they're the politest people in the world, I swear. I mean, most of it's like, they call me Mr. Mark. It's like, actually, if you look at like my username on most stuff, it's Mr. Mark, and no one understands where it's from. Because you get off the airplane, and Rico used to bust my chops about it all the time. He'd go, oh no, Mr. Mark, Mr. Mark, Mr. Mark. So anyways, we would literally stand there within like 30 minutes, man. A city of 30 million people, man. There are people lined up, and they're surrounding you, and they're asking for pictures and autographs, and it's just a really, really, really cool experience, and for me to be able to share that with some of the guys. Like, I brought my brothers over there, and my brothers had the opportunity to share that with me. Which is a big, big deal. And, Rico, who's like a little brother to me as well, just a fantastic, really, really fun, incredible. I mean, definitely for you, any kind of chance you can go over there, go over there. It's a really, really, really cool, interesting, incredible society. Probably one of the most interesting, social dynamics that go on. You just sit back as an American and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, wow. Some of the stuff you're totally displaced by, because you're like, it's just different culturally. Yeah. So really, really cool. That was probably one of my better experiences, is doing that with Rico. No doubt.
That's awesome. And, you always see another thing that always comes with Pride is the shadiness that you hear about. So you hear almost the conspiracy theorist types, but with the fight game, right? So you hear about, obviously the ties with Yakuza, and you talk about fixed fights, and maybe things weren't quite as they seemed. I don't know how much you can divulge. Obviously, it was a big part of your career, but how much truth is to some of these rumors that you hear about there in the rumor mills in mixed martial arts about, how legit some of that stuff was and how legit it wasn't?
I know that there was, when it was called KRS before it turned into Dream Stage, the gentleman that I dealt with that started the company with it's a guy named Mr. Ishii. Mr. Ishii, who owned K1, Mr. Ishizaka, who owned Pride. And I know Mr. Ishizaka, it is crazy because there's so much, there's a lot of validity to it. There's a lot of truth to it. There was a lot of mobsters around. It wasn't like it was like going over there. It wasn't like a big secret. You would see how the Japanese guys that worked for Pride reacted when Mr. Ishizaka was around. You knew that he was just different.
Yeah.
You knew that there was something about him that was different, because he was more than just like a boss, or he's more than an owner of the company. They just almost, like, some of the guys, and again, like, politeness in Japanese is like you bow a certain level, and then you bow a little bit deeper, and you bow a little bit deeper, and then you hold your bow with what you're saying. Like Mr. Ishizaka, they would just hold their bow until he was out of the room. You know, it would be like this reverence of, like, you're looking at it going, like, what's he doing? Usually it's a quick bow, like, and then standing up, and it was like, it's strange. So stuff like that, I knew Mr. Ishizaka had a certain affinity for me. I would always go over to any of the events either I was participating in or over there as whatever he wanted. He'd hang out with me. We'd go out. We'd have dinner together. He would make it a point to do that with me. And then here's the big part. So when K1 had their first event in Las Vegas, Mr. Ishizaka came over, and I was not allowed to be at any gaming table with him. I wasn't allowed to have any pictures taken with him. I wasn't allowed to have dinner with him. Yeah. I wasn't allowed to be in public with him. And all of this came from, that's when it had transitioned to Dream Stage, and it came from a gal named Yokino, and she basically said, Mark, here's some things, you're here at the event, and she said, just no across the board.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. And that just made the light bulb go on even more.
Type thing.
Oh yeah. So, the part about it too, I can speak for myself. I never threw a match for anybody. They had talked a little bit about some stuff, and it was just one of those weird things where you had to take enough inferences of what they were talking about and go like, all right, no, I'm just not interested. I know that, Coleman had to face some hard choices with what he had to do to be able to participate in Japan, and it served its purpose because he, as one of the best tournaments assembled talent-wise. He's the champ, man, and there's no way he gets to participate in that without having to do some stuff that I know he didn't agree with.
Okay.
And he's admitted to stuff before, and I'm not letting the cat out of the bag here. It's just, I know that he was on like a 3 or 4 fight losing streak, and they basically held it over his head of like, yeah, you can come fight for us, but we need you to do something for us first.
Yeah.
And I know it was kind of something like that. And it's like, okay. And, so there was a lot of stuff that you can actually go back and look at it going, oh God, man, I look at it now, it looks like it's pro wrestling.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy. It almost, it's one of those things like, it kind of tarnishes it a little bit, but still there's some things you can't deny, and you can't deny some of that action and that talent, the fights, and some of the best memories that I have is when I started watching some of the Pride stuff, and Dan Henderson was my favorite guy immediately.
Oh yeah,
one of the best.
Yeah.
Gosh, we've almost gone an hour, and we haven't even talked about the
Have we really?
Which is, yeah. My producer messages me. He's like, "Dude, we're at an hour." So, anyways, real quick, and this is crazy to even try to sum this up quickly, but.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of the stuff that you see in the Smashing Machine, but one of the reasons why it was so popular, and especially with MMA enthusiasts and the hardcores, those are the ones that'll quote the Smashing Machine and look back at these things, and that's where I always heard it in the back of my head, but I never sat down and watched it. Do you ever look back at that and see what was going on in your life at that time, and think, what the hell was happening? I mean, obviously you lived it. But then to actually go back and watch, 2.5 hours, whatever it is, and see that, it must kind of blow your mind, like how things were going.
Oh, it was impossible to. So when they filmed it from like 1999 going into 2000 into the Grand Prix, and so they didn't let me see 1 second of film. Like I didn't sit down and watch it daily or anything like that, any outtakes from it. So I didn't see any of the film. I had an idea of like, oh, they filmed this, they filmed that, they filmed this,
Yeah.
So the first time I ever watched it, I watched it in California at the Dolby Sound Studios. So it's a movie theater, and it's just me and the producer, the director, the cameraman, and it was like 6 of us in a movie theater, right? Yeah. And we sit down and watch it. These guys aren't even watching the movie. They're watching my reaction to everything that I'm watching on film. And the film gets over, and I literally, I'll never forget this. I like stood straight up, and the lights came on, and John Greenhouse, the producer, was like, "So what'd you think?" And I just looked at him with a blank face, and I go, "Dude, I'm gonna have to get back with you, man. I'm gonna have to get back with you." And he goes, "What do you mean get back with us?" I was like, "I mean, you're gonna have to like check in with me like tomorrow or something." I'm like, I don't even emotionally, I'm just like exhausted. I'm exhausted right now.
Sure.
And I literally left, and these guys were following behind me going, "Hey, you okay?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm like, just leave me alone. You know, I'm going to be okay. Just leave me alone." And I got in my car and I drove off, and John had called me right after that. He's like, "Hey, dude, are you sure you're going to be okay?" And I go, "Yeah, just, you know, that's a lot to take in, dude."
Just trying to process it all. Yeah.
Oh.
Has your so you said you have a son. Has your son seen it? Have you walked down
actually,
that road?
without my permission, man, he had watched it. Oh God, man, I think it's going to be like 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh my God!
And he knew it existed because he had seen the DVD
how could
cover.
you not?
And, you know, he's just like, oh, and I was like, oh, is it, you know, they followed me, a film crew, da, 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 da. Not going into the content. You know, I mean, he obviously understands that I'm in recovery. You know, in all this different stuff. And so he ended up watching it. Oh my God, man. It was like, it was like being grilled not about everything. Here's what's funny about it. Cyrus. So all he wanted to talk about was my fight. He didn't want to talk about anything else.
Wow.
All he goes, hey, dad. He goes, in that one fight, when you're doing that, why don't you just stand up and start kicking him in the head? You know, or something like that. And they'd be like, oh my God, you're being serious right now? He goes, yeah, I would have stood up. And so he was critiquing my fighting more than anything else.
Wow.
And I was like, are you sure you don't have other questions? And he goes, I know. Sure. I just about my fighting. So that was a relief in some sense. I mean, obviously he's full disclosure on a lot of stuff that's going on in the past. And I mean, my son just can judge me for, you know, obviously for what I've done from then until now. And, you know, I'm not even close to the same person. So.
Okay. Final thing. And we got to get into this, man. It was announced, you know, The Rock announces that he is making the Smashing Machine. The Rock is going to play you. First of all, drink that in. That's awesome.
I know, right? Oh my God.
Incredible. But then he's going to do this movie. Obviously there has to be a huge process to this, finding out about it. And we talked off air, and obviously things with the right and all that.
Yeah.
But we'll skip all that stuff with the paperwork and the laws and all that stuff. But it's happening now. What can you tell us about the process and maybe the time that you had with DJ? You guys are on that sort of.
I know.
That's probably cool. That's probably cooler to your son than everything that you did in your fight career, that you're just hanging out with The Rock and calling him DJs.
I know. Isn't that crazy? So, you know, obviously the pandemic has slowed things down, but it's, you know, anything that's come up that he can do now, he's doing. And he's like, hey, I promise you, you know, this is like next on the slate, coming up into the 2021. He's going to try to release something at the end of that year. If not, he's going to hold it until the following summer. But sure. It's just really cool. You know, he's like, he has an idea. When we talked, he has a very clear idea in his head of what he wants this to look like. And he woke up in the middle of the night and he's just like, hey, you know, calls his agent, says, here's what you need to do. This is my next project. I'm going to end up doing it. And, you know, I know it's going to be the right fit and everything. And I ended up speaking with him for quite a bit right before he made the announcement in Madison Square Garden. Yeah. So he like calls me up and, you know, texts me, hey, you available? And I was joking. I was like, nah, I got to check my schedule. You know, so it's just like, you know, we get on the phone, we talk, and it was this very gracious, very cool conversation. And he's like, hey, here's what I have in mind. here's kind of what I'm thinking I want to do. And, obviously this is just a rough draft, but, he's very clear about what he wants to do. And it's incredible. It's like, if you're going to have one person on the planet play you, it's like that would be the person you would pick. It's just like, holy crap, he's
happening. It's
yeah,
wild,
he's
man.
on fire.
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. And, once we get closer to that, and I would just love to do this again, because I think there's more that we could definitely dig into. And I'm so happy for you, man, because, after I watch the Smashing Machine and I do my due diligence and I'm looking into your life, I feel like, your story is a story that more people need to know about and more MMA fans need to know about. And I'm just glad that I could do this with you for an hour.
Oh, thank you, man.
Out there, man, because it's a cool story, and I think you deserve a lot of recognition out there, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I said that, everybody, I go, there's plenty of people out there that have won more championships, won more belts, done more things, but that's not what a lot of times what you look at for a story. It's like, through trials and tribulations and ups and downs, and, it's like life, man. It's like all this stuff that's going on right now. It's like, people have gotten, they're kicked in, to say the least. And, it's like, how can you rise above it? How can you be better than you were yesterday? And so, I'm fortunate, and I appreciate you having me on the show, and for sure we'll do this again.
All right. Well, I definitely appreciate it. Stay safe out there, my friend, and we'll get in touch soon, and we'll do it again.
All right. Appreciate it, Si. Thanks, bud.
There it is. And there it is, Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine. That was awesome. It was set for 30 minutes. We went like an hour and 15. Awesome stuff with Mark, and I hope you guys got a little MMA education out there. Go watch the Smashing Machine. It's very hard to find, I will tell you that. But go do your due diligence, look on the internet, order the DVD, and watch that. It is absolutely incredible, and that is it. You can find us on all your social media outlets. You can find us on our official YouTube channel. I'm Cyrus Fees, and we'll see you next time on In This Corner.